Welcome to the Jameson Files. I'm Carrie Weber and I'm your host. So glad to have you back and joining us for another episode. Thank you so much for being a part of our Jameson Files community. If you're watching us live on Facebook, thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to be with us live and joining us in the conversation. We'd love to hear your feedback throughout the session. And if you're watching this on a recording, either on Facebook or on YouTube, or you're listening to us through however you listen to podcasts, thank you so much. I'd love to invite you to share this with others in the dental community. Our goal is to create a Jameson Files community that gives you the content and information that you need to help you get closer and closer to your ideal practicing vision. I'm really excited today to have a tremendous guest with us. It's Eric Pook, who is the president of Cirrus Consulting. And what Cirrus does and brings to the table is extremely valuable for any of you out there that are leasing your facilities. This is going to be a conversation that is directly for you. You may be considering, do I stay in this current situation in this facility? Do I move on? A lot of those considerations have happened throughout the past year. And I would say, Eric's been very busy, Eric and his team, in helping doctors make the most out of their real estate or lease situations that they find themselves in. They take care of practices all across North America. And so it's an honor to have you with us today, Eric. Thank you so much for joining me in this session.
Very happy to do so. Been looking forward to it for quite some time. Thank you for having us, Carrie.
Thank you. So, Eric, when we've had several conversations over the last few weeks. My husband Jess and you have had a lot of conversations, as have you and I. You've also been very generous in sharing your time and knowledge with our team here at Jameson, our Jameson advisors. And a lot of the pieces of that conversation that came out that you shared with us are so valuable and important, in my opinion, to doctors and the current situation, a very key element of their business operations, and that's their practice lease. You had shared how many conversations that you have been having again and again and again over just the past year alone, let alone the years prior to that, as doctors are in this, what you called it, and I loved it, the wave of awareness, this heightened sense of awareness of where am I now, what's possible, what am I missing, where are my blind spots, and even exploring the ideas of, do I stay where I am today or do I move on? And I'd love to dig into that with you today. What have you been finding in your conversations with doctors across North America through the past year that have been perhaps a consistent topic of your conversations with them, or even some of the things that have been surprising to those doctors that you and your team have identified when it comes to their leases that they are in commitment with?
Yeah, it's great. Well, thanks, Carrie. Lots to unpack there. Perhaps the best way for the viewers is to look all the way back to almost this time last year, which was when you and I and others were doing webinars to try to make sense as to what was happening, shelter in place, lockdowns, etc. Some areas still in lockdowns or otherwise. So, looking back chronologically, what we saw this time last year was, as from Anchorage to Honolulu to Key West and everything in between, as everyone began to lay off their staff, the number one hit to their overhead expenses became the tenancy expense and the rent and the lease. And it was almost collectively, with thousands of doctors register for one of our Shine webinars, and collectively you could almost hear a sigh of, where's my lease? Do I have a lease? And where's my landlord's phone number? And suddenly then there became a really heightened awareness to say, well, I'm closed. There's no way I should be responsible for paying for my specific, expenses. I'm closed. Yet what many, unfortunately, doctors realized was that the lease survives it all. It's pandemic proof. It's, basically, it is a certainty, like death and taxes. So what was really helpful was doctors suddenly realized the importance of that office lease. And then really for the first time in perhaps years, or in some cases decades, dusted off that old lease from the 80s or the 90s, dug it out, and then really wanted to figure out what was in it, what was their liability, and more importantly, hey, I'm required to be closed. How can I possibly be required to pay rent? And so that was the first piece, was an awareness of how important the lease was, how detrimental it could have been had the pandemic or the lockdowns continued, and if the landlords weren't helpful. So a lot of them reached out then for their landlords for help, for assistance, let it be a free rent or rent deferral. And unfortunately, a lot of doctors said, you know what, my landlord's my best friend. I golf with them, great guy, great gal. Yet suddenly they wouldn't even pick up the phone. When they needed help, when the doctor needed the help, the landlord was crickets. So that created, in my opinion, a bit of a shift in the doctor's perspective and position about their value, being a perfect tenant, paying their rent on time, basically just signing on to whatever was newly proposed every 5 years, never, even causing a fuss, getting a plumber to come in. They incurred all those additional costs. And suddenly I think that they're, perhaps cheated isn't the right word, but they were definitely very upset about how the situation went down this time last year. So what we've seen afterwards is now a big shift of doctors saying, you know what, next time around, I'm definitely going to make sure my lease is properly structured. And you know what, I'm going to get what I feel are fair financial terms and business terms as well. Because, heaven forbid something happens, or heaven forbid something happens to the doctor, I want to be protected. And they suddenly then saw the lease for the massive 100-page book of liability that it is. So those were some key ones. And then on the second part of your question, I think what some doctors did, unfortunately, and some are in that situation, can be a default situation, meaning that they called a contractor, right? It was crisis mode. Hey, I need to block off some operatories. I need to make some changes to my reception area. And they did that without knowing that within the alteration section of the lease was a very clear and specific language that they can't make any changes without the landlord's prior written consent. So there's a bit of a building issue that if the landlords wanted to use that against them in the future, to let it be to nullify their options to renew or the ability to sell, there's definitely some cleanup work. And the second part that some people realized the hard way was the landlords were smart. They would get 100 or 200 requests this time last year to say, hey, Carrie, I can't make rent. I need help. So what a lot of them did strategically was to ask all of their tenants to say, great, send me your last 3 years of financial statements or audited financial statements or tax returns or otherwise. Of course, a lot of dentists had a great 2019 and certainly were a little reluctant to do that. So a lot of the dentists, unfortunately, just ignored that request and didn't share it. Unfortunately, a lot of doctors only realized after we reviewed their leases that in the section of their lease was specific that the landlord could, for any reason, once a year, actually request those financials. And if it wasn't sent through, right, that doctor could then be in default of the lease because of that specific clause that required the doctor to share it for any reason whatsoever. So yeah, there's definitely, from that perspective, we're not through the woods. I think a lot of doctors might find, unfortunately, some unpleasant surprises when they go to renew their leases. So, and then since then, it's been, on the positive, it's been a great time to shift from surviving to thriving. And right now, the value of a dental tenant is second to none, in my opinion. The highest build-out cost of any other tenant on the planet, right? Some of the lowest default rates, right? Especially through COVID. In addition to that, the rates are very, very low these days. Plus, they're bringing in high-quality foot traffic. So it's a bit of again, a huge opportunity for leverage, in my opinion, for the dental tenant. When the nail salons, hair salons, restaurants, are still to this day reaching out to the landlords for help, the dentist is now proving that they can never work from home. They are bringing in the high quality foot traffic, even in amongst of some of the largest hotspots throughout the continent, and therefore there's a lot more value for the dental tenant than I think we've ever seen in our company's 27-year history. So in all, we're certainly seeing a significant amount of leverage for the dental office landlord. And we're certainly seeing that the landlords are typically choosing one of two paths, either making life very difficult for the dentist because they feel they can, or on the flip side, they're saying, look, I want to retain this dentist. I don't want them to have to relocate. So let me make sure that we're fair.
Yeah. And, Eric, I love that we are talking today because I think you're supporting several things, right? Number one, just understanding, would you say a lot of doctors perhaps that you had conversations with have more than likely stepped into agreements that they either have long forgotten what they agreed to, short of what they're paying out every month or whatever the case may be, or maybe they never really knew what they were signing on for from the very beginning. There was probably a lot of blind trust, or perhaps a lot of blissful just not knowing of, what was included in, like you said, that 100-page document. I mean, who's really reading the whole thing? So that the pain of having these moments where you become aware that you don't even know what you're locked into. But also, I love what you're saying in terms of the opportunity for all of you doctors and practices that are watching or listening to this message, that you are a valuable tenant. You are desirable to the real estate community for all of the things that you represent, that long-term space holder, that consistency and strength of your business, the traffic, just like Eric said, that you're bringing to the table. Just such interesting perspectives to step into. And, when you presented to our team recently, you had some stories, not to get into those, but it was both encouraging, but also some frightening stories of, not to make you afraid, not to get you overreacting about this, but I think it's just, I want to drive home the message that this is a massive opportunity as you, as dental practice owners, review the operations of your business. If you haven't utilized a tool like this and really taken a deep dive into what you're engaged in at this time, there may be a great deal of opportunity within that. So Eric, what are some opportunities that you see for doctors if they're trying to make some decisions for themselves? What are some things that they need to be considering in this moment or looking into, or the conversations they may need to be engaging in with their landlords at this time?
Great question. So Carrie, I'll say that let's break it up maybe into career stage. So first, let's talk about that doctor that's either opening their first clinic or buying a clinic or their second or third. So from a leverage perspective, yes. I mean, I can't stress that enough. The doctor has, in my opinion, some of the best leverage they've ever had because of the impact of COVID-19, because in many markets, the vacancy rates have gone up, market rates have stayed the same, or in some cases gone down. So the value of that dental tenant is high. So a couple of key things in terms of sort of tips and tricks or otherwise is that when they're negotiating the very first lease, it boils down to the letter of intent. The very first communications. Is it through the landlord's broker? Are they dealing directly with the landlord? And more importantly, in our opinion, the letter of intent is where the vast majority of the negotiations occurs. We want to include the 7 main financial variables: base rent, annual increase, common area maintenance, fixturing, free rent, landlord work, tenant improvement allowance, etc. We want to include all of those core elements to ensure that every possible nickel and dime is negotiated to minimize that cost, which could be $1 to $2 to $3 million. I mean, even a $5,000 a month rent over the next 5, 10, 15, or on average 26 years that the doctor's in the same location can be millions of dollars of financial commitment, even assuming a simple 3% annual increase. So focusing on the letter of intent and including the proper language. Is there a demolition right? Is there a relocation right? Does the landlord, could they tear up the lease basically if they exercise their ability to demolish the space with 6 or 12 months worth of notice? It really depends on what's within the lease. Commercial, very different from residential, right? Commercial really does boil down to what's written in black and white into the lease agreement. For doctors who are acquiring, again, one of the biggest things we see missed that I was sharing with your team is especially in an acquisition front. Let it be the largest group to the to the smallest single practitioner. They don't see the acquisition of the practice as an opportune time to renegotiate the lease. So a lot of doctors, as they're buying a clinic, the M&A attorneys are going through the full process, right, getting the deal done. But the lease is, oh yeah, let's just assign it and let's just get the deal done. Yet the doctors come in with a bag of money to buy the clinic, yet at the same time misses that opportunity to say, look, I know there's only 2 years left on the remaining lease and another 2 5-year options. If the previous dentist never had professional representation or the lease is in a pretty poor sad state of affairs, that they really miss that opportunity to renegotiate that either as the lease is assigning or potentially if that landlord is in a difficult situation. If I was the landlord, I would love to have a dentist come to me to say, look, I'm willing to commit to a new 10-year term. Forget about just the remaining year or two. I'll give you a new 10-year term with 2 5-year options. Well, again, all the landlord sees in the eyes of the tenant is just a dollar sign. So if we can leverage term and options, that gives a lot more ability to help deal with some of the issues, improve it. Let that be personal guarantees. A lot of doctors are surprised to know that even after they sell their clinic, they remain personally and continually liable. If their spouse had co-signed, right, then their husband or their wife would remain liable as well, even after they've sold the clinic. So these are the type of things that a lot of our clients are surprised about when we review their lease, to say, oh, that could never happen to me. It would never happen to me. Or heaven forbid, if the doctor was to pass away, many are surprised to know that a lot of the leases are binding to the successors or heirs. So just like a will and estate planning exercise, if they haven't put in the proper protections to cover themselves or their estate, then what would happen, doctor, if you were no longer there? What's the plan as it pertains to that lease? Because then the estate, as we've seen some examples of over the past few years, the spouse who may have no involvement with the practice is then responsible for that $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 a month for the remaining 5 or 10 years on the lease.
That's one of the things that gives me heart palpitations for people. But again, in just what you shared, that part, the being in tune with before it's too late to take the opportunity to negotiate. And I thought that was a huge point to make, for knowing how more and more even single or 2 location practice owners are acquiring a 3rd location or that 2nd location or the 4th location. And what a missed opportunity, as you had just said, to really make a positive impact on whatever you're committing to for the long haul through that transition or that practice acquisition, but then also to protect yourself against the risks of, if you don't know, and I would venture to say when people listen to this, there's going to be a healthy handful that says, I don't even know where my lease is. I mean, I haven't looked at that in 7 years. I'm just in the flow with this place, and this is where I show up, and when we have a problem, they come and fix it, and that's really it. Right. You don't even know. And not only do they not know what's in it, they don't know where it is. Would you find that? Is that a conversation you have on the regular?
Of course. And it's, look, the doctor is running a business, is a fantastic clinician, went through all the years of dental school and specialty school without, in some cases, a day or a single class on the business side of dentistry. So we've done a lot. Tufts use us now in the 4th year dental program because we're really trying to, yell from the rooftops to make sure that the dental community is aware of the importance of the dental office lease, and to make sure that they see the massive opportunity to make sure that the lease is aligned with their value of being a top quality tenant. So even for the mid-career doctors is a perfect time. They might think, oh, well, I guess I missed my original chance. No, every time that lease comes up for renewal is a perfect time to treat it as if you're a new tenant, rather than just, hey, exercising that next 5-year term. Well, if you exercise that term, That's it. And if you want to sell in the next few years, you're sort of like a pirate walking to the end of that gangplank. There's no term left. And the banks, right, typically will not issue a loan if there's, they won't issue a 5 or a 10-year term of loan if there's only 2 years left on the lease. So term is a huge component for that mid-career doctor. Far easier to get it fixed early than it is 2 minutes before they plan to sell. And suddenly the landlord says, whoa, I'm not making any of these changes. And let me make life a lot more difficult. The practice transitions team at Shine will tell you that some of the number one reasons why a practice sale dies at the 11th hour is the lease.
Wow.
And on that front, a lot of, to finish off on that sort of fourth career stage, the transitioning doctor is also very surprised when their spouse is saying, you know what, honey, enough is enough, time to walk away. They're very surprised to know that hidden deep into Article 86, subsection 2, through the restoration clause or surrender language, it is to their responsibility to remove all leasehold improvements, even if potentially the former doctor had put it in, and return that space back to pre-dental condition if the landlord requests it. So even those that just want to throw the keys and say, I'm done and I get me out of here, it might not be that easy. And there could be even more financial issues if they were to just walk away.
Wow. I mean, Eric, that made me think of when we were having a conversation recently, you were encouraging the kind of put it in your calendar, some guidance. Can you share that? Because I feel like that fits in this in terms of if people are like, I don't even know when it's time for my lease. I don't even know when my lease is up. Or they're like, it was last week. I hope that wasn't the case. But can you share that guidance that I thought was really valuable and very simple to get on the right track?
Yeah. So for everybody following along live or watching it through the Grow platform or otherwise afterwards, one of the great perspectives here is to, number one, make sure you have a signed copy of your lease and a digital signed copy. A lot of doctors they either signed it, sent it on, but they never got a countersigned copy. And if we don't have what the landlord's agreed to, then technically it's not worth the paper it's written on. So one of the easiest ways of doing it is just emailing your landlord and ask for a signed digital copy, and they should have it there, not only from the last renewal, but every renewal, every amendment going back to the original lease, which could be 1982 potentially. Mm-hmm. So number one is to get a digital copy of the lease to know exactly what your contractual obligations are. And for those that might have acquired or are thinking of acquiring a practice, make sure to get that as part of your due diligence. I had a call with a doctor in Southern California who never even received it as part of the purchase. It wasn't until after we did the review that I said, well, no, this isn't the lease. Where's the actual 30, 40, 50-page lease? And unfortunately, it was just the assignment that he was looking at. So by the time finally he requested it, he was just gutted to see all of the negative terms and the personal guarantees and the ongoing liability post-sale and all of these other restoration, relocation clauses, demolition clauses, was just blown away that none of his professional team said, get the lease, review the lease, and get it professionally reviewed. But what you were referring to was, again, practically, as people are feverishly, digging through their emails to dig that up and to the Dropboxes and whatnot. The two things really put in your calendar. Number one is, when does your lease expire? Put it right in your calendar. And then more importantly, if you have any remaining options to renew your lease, what is the option to renew deadline, which is typically 3, 6, or 12 months prior to the actual lease expiry. And in essence, you might think, yeah, you know what, Carrie, I signed a lease probably 8 years ago, and I've got at least another, I must have 20 years. You don't. All you have is the original term, and then you have 2 options, right, to exercise, to renew the lease, which basically means you agree to everything within the lease with the exception of rent, which again isn't a great position to be in. But let's say you want to exercise that option. You have to give notice at that date, meaning 3, 6, or 12 months in advance. If you don't, if you forget, if you're chairside, it's a pandemic, everything's going on, right? You're not alone. That happens every day. But what that means is those remaining 2 5-year options have become null and void, meaning that there's no term left. At the end of that expiry, that's it. Now, the landlord may be willing to obviously re-engage, but if you're looking glass half full, it's never too late to engage professional help and to draft a new letter of intent or proposal, treating yourself as a new tenant to say, hey, I want another 10-year term with 2 5-year options. Forget about the lease from 8 years ago. It's COVID time, and I definitely want to make sure that the lease is now aligned to where they're at as a career. And it happens, right? You're the new associate, so excited to get going. We did the lease for Dr. Sam Batcher, who's the dentist for the San Francisco Giants. He wrote us a great testimonial and a great video review. And he said, yeah, I was so excited to get going, opening right next to the ballpark. A friend was a lawyer, had a look at it, but you know what? We just signed it and we went through it. And his lease was, I mean, you can watch his video. It was an incredible story of how we dramatically renegotiated all the financials. And as he attributed, even just on the business clauses, helped to save him hundreds of thousands.
Wow. I mean, I just feel like that part, the takeaways for me is wherever you stand in your awareness of what you're contractually engaged in right now, I always say, when is the best time to start getting on track of whatever it may be? Now is good. So I love the glass half full mindset. And I mean, Eric, such powerful first steps that you shared that are very simple. Number one, get the digital copy and make sure you have the actual lease. I mean, the whole thing. And then to set those dates in your phone, in your calendar, so that those moments don't pass you by in the midst of the busyness of the day and of life. You're intentionally putting that in your path to have that signal come up for you to do whatever it is you can do to improve the situation that you're in or protect yourself, whatever the case may be. So such great insights, Eric. I mean, so much about heightening our awareness of this very integral piece of our businesses. So if there's anyone in the community listening that is interested in what Cirrus can do for them, because they may say, this all sounds great, and I don't understand. It is all a foreign language to me. So what are some things that they could do with you that could be a helpful first step?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think practical terms, obviously get a copy of the lease, number one, a digital copy. Mm-hmm. Part two is have it professionally reviewed, which we'll touch on in a second. Make sure you're aware of those critical dates. Right? When does it expire? When is the option to renew deadline? Yes. And a lot of questions we get are to when or how do I engage the landlord? Well, typically in our experience too, but even with COVID, it's caused us to rethink the whole negotiation playbook. In some cases, landlords that are perhaps under pressure from their banks or are dealing with a lot of vacancies or lower rental income, maybe they're willing to engage in negotiations even 3 years prior to expiry. Depends on the situation. But starting the process early, the more time you have, the more leverage you have. And then in addition to that, know the landlord's playbook. They might defer, they might delay, they might wait as long as possible to before the time that they actually engage. So being proactive, right? One of the strategies we do is to send a proactive proposal. So we hit them right in the wallet to think about the engaging in lease negotiations a little earlier than they might have been thinking. And it's, again, something that we can create a win-win on. So those are the core components. In terms of that, again, for any of your listeners or anybody watching live, they can go to our website, Cirrus Consulting Group, CIRRUS, consultinggroup.com, or email us at info, at cirrusconsultinggroup.com. And request a complimentary lease review. For all viewers of the podcast today, we'll certainly waive the fees for that lease review to at least understand and know. So if nothing else, you'll be able to take away from that hour-long conversation of what are market rates in my area, right? What are vacancies? What does the market look like, especially over the past 2 years? And then number two, what are some of the major red flags that I need to be aware of to be prepared for in the next negotiation? And also for those, I would suggest putting urgent in the subject line, because if you're in a month-to-month situation or if you've missed your option to renew deadline, that's definitely something that we want to clear our skies for, to help out the dental community as quickly as possible, because that obviously puts you in a very risky situation, because the landlord could wake up tomorrow, put a brown envelope on your front door, right? And then 30 or 60 days later, you've got a big problem.
What a generous offer. Thank you so much, Eric. So everyone, I would highly encourage you, if you are leasing your space as we speak, find them on cirrusconsultinggroup.com and take advantage of this complimentary lease review. What do you have to lose and what do you have to gain from reaching out to these experts to help you with wherever you are right now in your practicing career? Looking for those opportunities, looking for how you can shore things up and protect yourself even more. I highly encourage all of you listening to reach out to the Cirrus team and to Eric and let them help you and see what is possible in your current situation. So with that, Eric, thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing so much of your wisdom and insight with the community. Such valuable information, and thank you for generously sharing with us. And I do hope that those of you listening will stay connected with Eric and his team and let them help you along your path. I know that that's what they're passionate about, and I know that they can be a huge benefit to you in your ongoing career path. So, Eric, thank you so much for being with me.
Carrie, absolute pleasure, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. So to all of you, thank you for once again joining us for another Jameson Files episode. Be well, and we will see you next time. Take care. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Jameson Files. Visit us online at jmsn.com. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play Music, or Spotify. Do you have questions or topics you'd like for us to answer or cover on the next podcast? Email us at podcast@jmsn.com.